They've put themselves out there in the world. They've taken all kinds of risk. They've bled for, you guys have all bled for what you're doing right now, imagine. And it probably kills you when your people aren't taking it as seriously as you do.
Todd Holzman, founder and CEO of Holzman Leadership, has dedicated his career to improving how people communicate. He has worked at renowned institutions such as McKinsey, the Harvard Kennedy School, and IBM. He has also been a guest lecturer at Columbia University for 3 decades, sharing his expertise with future leaders. Holzman has developed over 30,000 leaders across numerous organizations and trained a global network of trainers and coaches in effective conversation skills.
Oftentimes, the very attempt to avoid conflict ensures you're going to get it. So I guess, first of all,
has leadership changed in the last 20 years, or does it just depend on how you look at it?
I think the kind of leadership that we need from people has, I would say, evolved, and a lot of things have stayed the same. So I guess, first of all, it's a question of what do you even mean by leadership? So a guy who's much more eloquent than I am on this subject is a guy that I taught with at the Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, a great guy named Ron Heifetz. And he distinguishes leadership from authority. Typically, traditionally, when we thought of leadership, we thought of, you have this authority figure, somebody the organization has vested with kind of power, who has a high ranking position. And we look to this person to kind of paint a compelling vision of some future to pursue, and to kind of motivate us and help us to get there. And that traditional way of thinking of leadership, worked pretty well when the world wasn't so complex. We could, when things are less complex, you can look up to your authority figures for answers. But as things become more complex, you can't. There is leaders above are more reliant on leaders and people below to figure out what the problems are and figure out the solutions are. So there you have the rise in complexity, which then requires people to not only look up, but to look to themselves and to look to each other for leadership. By leadership, I mean the ability to identify problems and opportunities, and then to connect and mobilize with other people to address those problems and opportunities. And that's something you do within your authority, like with your own team, people that report into you and people report into them, but also beyond your authority, up the organization, across the organization, outside the organization. And then as organizations have become flatter, and we need interdependent thinking, meaning collaboration across silos to solve complex business problems, then you can't have this antiquated notion of leadership that leadership is only something delivered from on high by our authority figures. It's something that everyone needs to see as their responsibility, and that it is almost like a God-given right as well, that leadership is everyone's right and responsibility. We all have a responsibility for identifying problems and opportunities to make things better, and then talking to each other about them so people do something about these things. And again, that's something that people need to exercise within and beyond their authority, up, down, across, and outside of their organizations. So that's probably the big shift from leaders to leadership. And it's something that anyone can do, regardless of the level of the hierarchy, regardless of their role.
That's really interesting, and it does make a lot of sense. Although I do see kind of a duality there where when things get more complex, people tend to look to their leaders for guidance, and yet the leaders, like you pointed out, need more data points. They need people to kind of lead their own units or like cross leadership, et cetera. So it is, like you touched on the word, collaboration at that point. The more complex, the more collaborative we need to be. Why do you believe Candor is crucial for effective leadership and team performance? I believe you might have touched on one example there.
It starts with the way I think about, and this guy Heifetz and also Dean Williams from the Kennedy School, we all kind of think about, and I was trained to think about leadership, right? Every day, people in their lives, inside of whoever's listening, your organization, you included, as maybe the head of this organization or the head of this small business. I mean, probably almost every day, if not almost every day, people see problems. They feel that bother them. They see opportunities to make things better. Now, if you're going to exercise leadership, and probably a lot of your entrepreneur listeners, they want their people to act and feel like owners. And it's probably one of their biggest complaints, I would imagine, because they put the blood, sweat, and tears. They've made the sacrifices. Those mid-career people who are your listeners, have left cushier jobs. They've put themselves out there in the world. They've taken all kinds of risk. They've bled for, you guys have all bled for what you're doing right now, imagine. And it probably kills you when your people aren't taking it as seriously as you do. So fine, we'll come back to that, okay? And I understand that. So, but your people, there are things that bother them, and there are opportunities to excite them. And so the active leadership is bringing it up in an engaging way with other people so that people want to lean into these things versus push you away. Okay, fine. So what does that mean? Well, you got to talk about it, right? And you better talk about it in a truthful way. That's also effective, because usually the things that you have to have truthful conversations about, I mean usually, but I think probably at least more often than not, it has the potential to be upsetting, to be uncomfortable, to create conflict, all of that. Because maybe your marketing person thinks maybe the salesperson thinks the way your marketing person is functioning isn't setting them up for success. Maybe it's true. Maybe the marketing person thinks the salesperson always blames us for their lack of success. So these two people have got issues, right? They got to talk to each other and work it out. And they're not going to work it out unless they're being truthful with each other. But if they're truthful with each other in a way that is antagonistic, they're making each other wrong, they're really not trying to figure out what's true together, then their attempt to it will often not result in an understanding or solving of the real problem, but also will create a new problem. Now they got a conflict in their relationship, which compromises their ability to solve the first problem. So if you think about just basic problem solving that happens between people in groups and teams and organizations and families, communities, schools, societies, so much of it depends upon how effectively we can have honest conversations with each other. And I'm fond of saying we can't solve any problem we can't talk about with each other openly and honestly. And I'm also, and when I worked at IBM, they were fond of saying, I liked is, there's no problem we can't solve as long as we get the right people in the room together, which I thought was a optimistic turn on what I say. And so that's basically it. And so that's the rationale for why the ability to have honest and effective conversations is so crucial to team, organizational, and just overall business, success. And there's a lot of research to back all that up.
Could you share a success story of how you've seen this used, or an example of how you've seen it used well?
When applied properly and when people are trained properly, we see huge improvements in their sales results. We see huge improvements in workforce productivity. We see huge improvements in business results, all of it. So working with 75 salespeople, pharma salespeople selling a particular therapy, we trained them for, a day, trained up their managers to keep coaching them for the next 3 months. 3 months later, according to the company, not according to us, their market share went up like a hockey stick. And they said it was 100% attributable to the training that we did, because there were no other variables that were changed in the system. So that was really, I did not expect that. That was remarkable. If you want to scale it up beyond that, so when I name companies I'm allowed to, you had British Telecom, who took nearly 3,000 managers through our training. We trained up 90 people to keep coaching them after the 1 or 1.5 day workshop was over. And they measured the impact of this in year 2. And what the CFO and his investment and efficiency engineers claimed is that this whole training program improved productivity across 35,000 engineering workforce by nearly 9%, earning them 120 million pounds of cost savings. And every measure of human engagement went up on there. It was a quarterly engagement survey. So this is why learning how to make your conversations with other people as truthfully as possible, that's how it could pay off. Again, applied properly.
Going back to your psychological or your psychology background and some of the pitfalls that people can come to or like trip up themselves up when they try to approach Candor. Maybe you mentioned like leading questions, and it seemed to basically tell me if I'm like off the mark here, but it seems to come from a place of fear or at least impatience. So rather than explore what you care about, what your perspective is, because you probably see and know things I don't, I'm just like, Todd, please do this, and I'm trying to get you to do this. So I'm kind of shortchanging both of us, and even if I'm successful in my manipulation there, let's say,
Right.
and then not exploring, not asking you. Also, I would think might be like somewhat fear based. Like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if heaven forbid you have a better idea than I have? Then all of a sudden I have to learn new things. I'm just curious, like what are your thoughts on why people might have some of those challenges?
Well, fortunately, we've got research, so I don't need thoughts. I also have some thoughts about it. I like the way you explained it. I think so. I'll put a new spin on this that I haven't before, just because the way you're affecting my thinking. I think it's anxiety. So I think all human beings, they want to achieve good stuff and they want to avoid bad stuff. And we're constantly anxious about that. Right? And this is probably ingrained into our DNA. Because if you weren't programmed to get good stuff and to avoid bad stuff and have the anxiety trigger, which would push you to avoid this and pursue that, then maybe our genes wouldn't be here to discuss that we're oriented that way. So I think that's always present for us. And we're easily spooked. It doesn't take much for people to feel threatened. I mean, it's remarkable in some ways how sensitive and fragile we are. And for those of you macho men, women who are listening, I'm not sensitive and fragile. Well, your impatience might be a sign of your fragility, right? Because you're not getting as fast to what you want to occur as fast as you would like, and you start to get anxious about it, and you get impatient, you stop listening, for example. That would be my fault, for sure. So I think it starts with the anxiety of, I'm not going to be able to get what I want or avoid bad stuff I don't want. So that's at its root. That's at the root of it. And so what people do, I think, does stem from that. So what you see in these conversations, if I'm to oversimplify the types, you've got AA, you've got the avoiders and the, the achievers or something, right? The avoiders, they're not so worried about achieving great things. They're really trying to avoid bad stuff from happening. So they will always under-optimize, right? So what they want to avoid is conflict, discomfort, a bad relationship. So they will largely not bring things up. Or if they're going to talk about them with you, they're going to water it down. They're going to say there's a bit of a problem, or we have an opportunity when there's a big effing problem, whatever it is. And of course, that may prevent them from getting into some undesirable conflict. And by the way, conflict is something to avoid, right? Because primitively, we could have been killed or ostracized by the group, which is tantamount to death, right? Because we were very dependent upon each other. So, and maybe we avoid the conflict, but the problem that is bothering us, or the opportunity that we're excited about, never gets resolved. And we got to live with that. And that's its own kind of torture. Ironically, though, oftentimes the very attempt to avoid conflict ensures you're going to get it. So I don't want to get into a conflict with you. So I'll ask you leading questions instead, right? Todd, how do you think that interview went? As my partner Olga might say to me. I think it went pretty well. Any opportunities for it to go better? Well, I don't know, this, that. Do you think perhaps you talked too much throughout the whole interview? I mean, David said he wanted to be a conversation, and you turned it into a monologue. At that point, it's not even leading, it's loaded, right? But so you could see, like, maybe she was thinking, I don't want to come out and say what I'm thinking to Todd directly because it might upset him. So I'll ask a bunch of leading questions, which I'm sure he's going to get upset. So you have that. So often the attempt to overprotect ourselves actually provides very little protection whatsoever. In a world that's more complex than the primitive world within which we lived, but also in terms of human social interactions. Now, if you look at the achievers, they got no problem with putting the issue on the table. They've got ideas about how to solve it. They've thought the whole thing through. But their problem is they might go too fast. So they might jump to action too quickly, for example. And they don't bring anybody with them because people are going to follow them if they agree there's a problem or opportunity and if they agree on the solution to that problem or opportunity. There's a lot of agreement you've got to get to move people. It's a nightmare. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how good your thinking is. If you're leading and nobody's following, what's the point? So the thing I say is you always got to do this in two steps. You've got to align on what's true, and then you could figure out what to do. So you can align on what's true in terms of the real problem opportunity, get real agreement, and then let's figure out what to do. And people, the achievers, they underdo that. Agreement on the problem or opportunity work. They're too quick to the action box. And sometimes they don't listen well enough so that they don't learn new things that may change their minds about what the issues are and therefore what the solutions might be, because they're so clear on their nirvana that they want everybody to get to. So those are some of the types, so to speak.
That's really interesting. It seems I look at entrepreneurship as like everywhere. Like immigration is an entrepreneurship exercise. Our lives are an entrepreneurship exercise. And you touched on our species and like the evolution. And it seems like what got us to 0 to 1, that's great. Thank you for getting us here. But now it's time to go from 1 to 100. And we have to maybe upgrade our business model, if you will. What are your thoughts on that?
Or upgrade our own software. Yeah.
Or
inside
software,
of
yeah.
us, No, absolutely. And this was, so I'm giving you a kind of a colloquial explanation of the research before about, avoiders and achievers. This comes from the research, this amazing guy called Chris Argyris. I'm telling you about this because of software. This is my software comment, and you were saying the same thing about business model, right? Because it's inside of us, but also the cultures within which we're living inside of our businesses and our organizations. So, and these are nothing but programs that determine how we act. So this amazing guy named Chris Argyris, who taught at 4 different graduate schools at Harvard, which is unheard of, wrote hundreds of articles. What was it? How many books? I think 30 books, and received 14 honorary doctorates for his massive contributions to a diverse array of different fields. It's like, who does that? So I called him I've called him the Einstein of the social sciences. He's just a brilliant, brilliant guy. And what he discovered was that people have 2 kinds of theories they carry around in their heads. And according to clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson, that these theories or programs are stored in different parts of our brains. So we have our espoused theories stored in one part of our brain, and we have our theories of use stored in a different part of our brain. So our espoused theories are all the ways that we believe we and all the people ought to behave with one another. I had to be courageous. I had to be compassionate. I had to be curious. I had to be collaborative. Whatever you want to say. And people truly believe these things. But if you put them under pressure, like when they actually have to behave with other people in real life, what determines how they behave are not their beliefs or their espoused theories. What determines how they behave is their programming or their theories in use. And what Chris discovered is a seemingly universal theory in use that gets activated whenever people interact around important issues. And it blocks people from behaving according to their beliefs, their better selves. and forces them to behave in a smaller way, to try to over control things, to try to keep things too comfortable, to be too competitive. I want to win and not lose. I want to be right and not wrong. And to condemn people for when they don't think and act like they think people ought to think and act. And this thing gets activated and blocks people from living up to their full potential. And people are blind to the fact that it operates within people. And it's just a program that's inside of all of us. Chris studied 50,000 people. We've studied well over 35,000 people. So if you look at a 50,000 person data sample across companies, cultures, and countries, you see this theory in use that I call the overprotective program alive and well with people. So when you see yourself, like, you may believe that it's important for me to have a courageous conversation, but then you see yourself avoiding conflict like the plague. Are you a hypocrite? Maybe, but it also might be you really believe in the importance of courage, but you're really wired for conflict avoidance. And your wiring and your programming is stopping you. It's not that I would say you're a hypocrite. It's that you're divided within yourself. And so, yes, I think you're right that, we got to 0 to 1. And by the way, it's a huge achievement. And we need to keep 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 or whatever you want to say. But the rest of the 90 to 99% is going to require an upgrade, which will subsume the previous programming. And the upgrade is something that my colleagues and I call the transformative program. I don't really like that, but fine. And it's where, if I were to put it in a 2-word nutshell, it would be courageous humility. And bringing that to every important interaction you have with other people. Now, I really don't give a shit. Can I curse? I guess I just did. About trivial conversations. Have fun, man. But when you're going to talk about something that really matters, I think this is a distillation. Is that the word? Of distillation. Thank you. Of the mindset. You have to have the courage to be honest about the real issues. And you have to, at the same time, have the humility to be open to being wrong. Because ultimately, candor is about trying to figure out what's true in order to serve a greater good. And that, the ability to do that is really a fundamental reprogramming of ourselves. And it's also a skill. And it's learnable, thankfully, and very learnable. And that's part of the reason I'm running the book, because I want to explain to people the do's and don'ts of effective conversations based upon our work and research for the last 30 years, and have a place where people can go to kind of get useful information about this. And so it doesn't always have to be about being courageous or radical or anything extreme like that. Like, it's actually a learnable skill. So here's what it actually looks like, and then maybe the book could do some good in developing people, although there'll be limits to that. And I'm developing an AI app as well, so that people can get developed in this at a low cost in the flow of their lives. So any important conversation you want to have with anyone about anything, you could bring it to her and she'll prepare you to do it, but she'll also role play in a very realistic way the heck of the conversation with you that you're going to have, and provide you corrective coaching in the moment. And each time you use her, you will get better and better at having the conversations that matter most to you in your life, in and outside of work.
Amazing. And when will that app be out?
Man, I do not know. What I'm hoping to do is, by this time next year, the book is out, and then I could offer the app for free to all people who buy the book, so that they could get some real training. Because I don't like the fact we train a couple thousand people every year. My firm, I have a 13-person global faculty, UK, Europe, and America. More than half of them are not in America, although I live in Manhattan. What I don't like about that is still our clients, top 1%, get access to this. But again, coming back to your first question, what is leadership? We need leadership from people at all levels in all directions. And right now, those folks get crap, right? yet we need more leadership from them than ever. So we better put up or shut up. And so we got to create mechanisms that are scalable and affordable, but that are actually good, as opposed to some vanilla online training, which is not going to make a difference. So that's why I'm doing that.
Sounds fascinating. I'll certainly be picking up a copy of your book, and looks like I'll be getting a free app with it.
I'll send it. I'll send you a copy. Don't worry.
Okay. The Power of Candor coming out next year. Can you give us any kind of peaks? Any key insights or any goodies we can look forward to?
The last 50 minutes. I think what you could look forward to is, so I teased it a little bit earlier. Number one, for those of your kind of mid-career people who are big Lebowski fans, I will quote Walter Solchek talking to Jeff Lebowski in a diner saying, there are rules. This is not Nam, man. There are rules. And so what I want to be able to or maybe it was at the bowling alley. Thank you. God, I should be ashamed of myself for not placing that quote right.
It's one of my top five.
Yeah, it's my top 3, so I'm even more ashamed. Is laying out the clear rules, the do's and don'ts of having honest and effective conversations. So I'm trying to. So that's one. 2, to talk a lot more about how do you get good at that, and so that you can actually read the book. And this will be quite a feat to do in the context of a book, because most books are informational learning. They don't actually train you. But I want to take people through exercises while they're reading that will help them develop this muscle to a degree. And I want to see if I could push the boundaries of the book around that. And also I want the book to be a source of inspiration to people, where I'll be sharing stories from all kinds of people who applied this stuff in their lives and the difference it made. And I want to make people worried about avoiding these conversations. Because, and I'll say, maybe this is the last thing I'll say to your audience, it's like, there are things that are bothering you. There are things that excite you. And maybe there's a reason why they bother and excite you more than they do other people. Maybe it's God or the universe or just how you're wired. But maybe it bothers and excites you because you're the very best person to address with other people the thing that bothers and excites you. And if you do, particularly if you do it skillfully, you're not only going to make people and things around you better, but you'll have an adventure, and taking these conversations on your shoulders will help you realize your full potential as a human being.
I like that. Where would you like to direct people as they anticipate your book launch, your LinkedIn account, your website?
Oh, well, we always have free resources. So my team put together free resources for your listeners and followers. What the heck is it called? Forgot the name of it. I think it's Todd Holzman Candor@gmail.com. So Todd Holzman Candor@gmail.com. All they need to do is, actually, what your listeners should do is refer to your podcast in the subject line, say, send me free Candor materials. They could just send it to my PA, and she will send it to them. And her email address, since I'm just having a senior moment, I'm forgetting the email address I was supposed to give you. Send it to Lace, LACE, at Holzman, HOLZMAN.com, and say, set podcast name. Was it Horizon? I think
Horizon Search.
Yeah, Horizon Search podcast. Send me free Candor stuff or whatever, something like that, and that'll trigger her to do it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for talking to us today. It was a real pleasure. You have a ton of experience and a great way of connecting like answers to questions and then leading into answers to the next question I was going to ask. That actually gives me a new question to ask you. So it's a real enjoyable and educational experience for me, and I'm sure the listeners as well.
It was for me too. So thank you for asking great questions, and thanks for listening, and thanks for letting me come on your show, and I hope it was useful.